Hey guys, I'm Greg.
I'm John.
Welcome to another episode of How It Could Work. How It Could Work is where we take ideas where people are speculating reboot ideas, remakes, sequels, crossovers. Today, it's Friday the 13th, so we're going to do Friday the 13th. And people have been talking about doing a remake for a long time now.
Yes, this is a troubled production.
Another remake. So we're going to give our idea for a remake.
Yeah, no found footage.
No found footage. But this remake idea, just to give you guys a heads up, this is solely like how we would just want to see it. Not in terms of like, let's pitch it in a way where a studio could pick it up or something.
Yeah. This isn't the only way it could be done. This is the Greg and John way.
Yeah.
This is what we think. If they gave it to us, here's what we would do.
Exactly.
Here's a cool movie that we could make.
So, we have a concept that we came up with. Let's hop into it. So before we go into like the setup of our plot here, one thing that we were talking about that John really brought up was that we would want to take it back to where Jason's a boogeyman. You had a great point of saying how he was like he became like the protagonist throughout the franchise.
He's the antagonist of each movie, but he's the protagonist of the series by the end of it because he's the only guy we see every time.
Bringing it back to the vibe where you don't see Jason all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And it's more like a spooky, could be supernatural, who knows.
Make Jason like a boogeyman and also take some of the themes from these movies and just play with them in a different way. Because like every Jason movie involves, reckless young people having sex in the woods. And so we thought we would take this and make the story a little bit more personal and use sort of a sexual anxiety to kind of motivate some of this stuff.
And create actual characters that, we could care for. That way, when killing starts happening, it's more the danger and the stakes are really raised.
Yeah, we don't want another vacuum where it's just like, kind of 2D people come to this camp and get killed.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we've done that so many times now.
Setup of this, it takes place in the 1980s again. It's a moderately, average small town, takes place in New Jersey. It's small. It's like right before the summer. There's a mall there. There's a movie theater. It's a
suburbs. Type of town where there's like enough stuff to do, but if you really want to do anything interesting, you have to drive half an hour into town, or into the city.
Our main character is this guy named Kevin. Kevin is this junior in high school. Kevin is just like, he's a sweet, timid, creative, outdoorsy, quiet type of nerd, basically. He's a sponge for information. He lives with his father, who works for the Historical Society. So he's heard the legend of Camp Crystal Lake, or, aka as it's known now, Camp Blood, because of the events that happened back then.
Yeah, and we don't want his dad give this spiel so many times. Yeah. He knows, and many others, but, it gives him a nice, sort of working knowledge of the story.
Yeah, and Kevin, he's really close with his dad because Kevin's an only child. Kevin's mom passed away a few years ago, actually. But anyway, at school, though, the main female character of this story is a girl named Becky. Becky is this girl that Kevin has a crush on. She's reasonably popular. She's a kind woman, good head on her shoulders. She doesn't have trouble keeping up with studies, but she also knows the value of having a good time.
Yeah, she's popular, but she's not like snooty or anything. She just, occupies the upper crust. She's got big dreams of leaving, so she's worked her way up to the top of the high school chain, and once that's done, she's blowing this popsicle stand.
Exactly. And Becky, her character is dating the main male supporting character, which is a dude named Dylan. Yeah. Dylan he's like a swimmer.
Top of the food chain, yeah. He's one of the star swimmers. He's not the star swimmer, but he is a pretty good swimmer. He's competitive and, kind of self-centered, prone to indulging in that competitive spirit. Probably has a lot of pressure riding on him. And naturally, doesn't treat Kevin very kindly at all because he can tell from a mile away that he's crushing on his chick,
Yeah.
So why would he?
And basically in class one day, Kevin overhears Dylan and Becky talking with their small circle of friends about this birthday trip he wants to take. So Dylan's dad is a contractor who just bought a patch of land on a steal, so they've got carte blanche to use the place until they break ground.
Ain't nobody gonna be there.
So later on that night, Kevin has dinner with his dad. His dad is like is probably the only one he can really confide in, the only one he can really talk to and have an open conversation with.
Yeah.
He tells his father about this trip that he heard that Becky's going to be taking. The dad asks, like, oh, where's that land? Kevin doesn't know, but in passing, like after they're done having dinner, he mentions that, oh, did you hear that they're going to close down the camp,
Dad doesn't let on as to exactly what's happening, but he does have an idea of, like, they're going to tear it down. It's already closed, but they're going to tear it down.
What happens then next is that night when Kevin finally goes to sleep, he has a dream about the camp incident about the story of Jason, about this mentally disabled, deformed body kid who was bullied a lot, drowning in the lake at Camp Crystal Lake.
He has this sort of surreal dream that's partly, flashes from the actual legend, as it's just come up, it's on his mind again. But also, the general anxieties of ridicule and sort of body discomfort that come with being in high school.
Exactly. So the next day, a tired like Kevin, he lurches through school the next day.
He's tired, he didn't really sleep well last night, so he spends most of the day just kind of nodding off and doodling in classes and stuff, and he begins... Just in his doodles, he starts to draw these images from his dream, and he writes down the words Jason lives, just kind of absent-mindedly. And the image he draws of Jason isn't, the same hockey mask, he's not telepathic. It's just, it's an impression of Jason as told through the story. It's his imagining of this sickly, deformed boy.
So later on that day, he sees Dylan, Becky, their small group of friends are having lunch. Dylan leaves the table to use the bathroom, which gives Kevin this opportunity to approach Becky, as he doesn't ever try to talk to Becky, especially if Dylan's around. So quietly and reserved, though, through this awkward interaction, he manages to tell the group, but primarily he's directing it at Becky, that he doesn't have a good feeling about them going to Crystal Lake for the weekend.
Yeah.
He can't really specify why, because he's not even entirely sure why he's having this feeling, because this dream's just kind of haunting him that he's thought about. But in this moment, when he's trying to warn Becky out of concern, Dylan returns without Kevin noticing that, oh shit, Dylan's here. And then he jacks the notebook that Kevin was doodling in.
Yeah.
Dylan starts making fun of him for this creepy image that he has on the paper. So
yeah.
Feeling threatened by Kevin, to insult him, he tears out the page, crumples it up, and throws it on the ground. Bell rings. They all have to go back to what they're doing. But before they leave, Becky grabs the paper and kind of looks at it, but then puts it in her backpack.
And at some point earlier during this day, he does get verification that Crystal Lake is in fact where they're going. He does overhear something.
That's basically our whole Act 1 setup right there.
That's
our Act 1 setup. Hopefully it was all making sense. We're still perfecting how to do this. So then when we break into Act 2, Dylan, Becky, the gang, the other characters of the gang, we don't really know their names yet or whatever.
This is just a treatment.
Yeah.
This is the important characters.
Yeah, they're having a great time at Camp Crystal Lake, kind of like what we'd expect from a Friday the 13th movie.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, they're going to Camp Crystal Lake, they're having fun, they're having a blast. Later on that night, they're sitting around, they built a campfire, and then Kevin is brought up in conversation. Clearly at this point, though, Becky is still kind of spooked by Kevin's warning about them not going to the camp, and she starts asking, why do you think he was saying all those things? And then one of the other guys in the group, dude that we're going to temporarily call Brian for now, he shares the urban legend tale of the boy named Jason who drowned in the water and now haunts this campsite.
He gives us the full rundown of the myth for the movie.
Yeah, so we're trying to build up Jason as this myth right now, instead of just, oh, boys go to the camp and they start getting killed.
And see how the myth applies to all the different characters, because there are lots of just small town ghost stories, and that's kind of how we wanted to approach the setup of this. And revisiting it makes Becky even more freaked out by everything. Becky really wants to leave. She's getting more spooked the longer this tale goes on, and the rest of the gang isn't really taking it seriously. They're making fun of Kevin, they're making fun of Becky now a little bit, because, you're just afraid of a little ghost story.
Yeah, ghost story about a boy who died over 20 years ago at this camp.
Yeah.
So at that night, though, when the group divides into cabins, we kind of want to have a deceitful kind of scene where Dylan's kind of drunk. He forces Becky into having sex.
Yeah.
Where Dylan is just he's extremely rough. But the entire time we can see that Becky is paranoid and fearful. You can see that she's feeling like someone's possibly watching them.
Yeah.
But no one actually appears in this moment. But the whole time you keep thinking, oh, is someone going to show up? Is this where the kids are going to die while they're fucking?
This is where we can really play with this sort of ghostly, spectral elements, because there are so many potentials for strange noises or, tricks to the eye.
Yeah.
So we can get creative with, all the kinds of creepy little things that people are hearing and thinking just because of the nuggets that have been planted in their mind by that story.
So that happens on a Friday and Saturday. The next day, they return home on a Sunday. The gang returns home safely. Dylan's like, see, Becky, you had nothing to worry about. We're all fine. We're all alive. And then this is when, we're breaking into where fun shit, fun, scary stuff really begins to take place. The boy, Brian, who shared the story about Jason, he doesn't attend school the next day. And then later on, we have a scene where one of the girls in Dylan and Becky's group is have those being stalked. She feels like something's watching her at her home. And then she gets annihilated, but we don't fully see how she gets killed. But when people discover the body, it's really fucking just torn apart.
Yeah, this is the time where we get to have some really cool, kills.
Yes. So instead of them all going to Camp Crystal Lake and they all die, it's kind of like you step into Camp Crystal Lake and you do stuff. Then if you leave, it's like you're taking the curse with you this time.
Yeah.
Kind of giving that vibe, kind of giving that presence.
We kind of wanted to borrow from some of the 80s revival stuff, and it almost took a little inspiration from It Follows and things like that, where it is like you cross a specific barrier and now you have this sort of curse upon you.
Exactly.
At least in a vague way.
So the news of the girl's death in the group, it spreads throughout the school in grief with everyone. Dylan finds Kevin and accuses him of murdering his friends because one of the friends is still missing. Mm-hmm. The other friend, the girl has been discovered dead. Dylan recounts, Kevin warning them not to go on the trip. Yeah. But now he kind of believes that was a death threat and not a, like a concern.
Yeah, maybe this is, this kid's kind of quiet. He's kind of strange. That outburst in the cafeteria with Dylan before the trip is a little suspect, and Dylan can kind of use that to his advantage.
Yeah, so using his influence, Dylan now has everyone in the school practically believing that Kevin is the killer.
A freak, yeah.
A little bit later on, Kevin does find a Becky alone at one moment and he tries to tell her like it wasn't him that did it. It wasn't him. And Becky looks at him, and I imagine the sort of scene. I know we didn't really talk about this, but I imagine a scene where and somehow he's trying to say who he thinks it is, but he can't say it because he thinks it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
But Becky kind of fills in the blank and says like, "You think it was Jason?" Like she's starting to think now maybe it was Jason. The midpoint of this film was like while Kevin's at school, cops call him in, he gets arrested and questioned by the authorities. So while Kevin's with the police, Becky learns about Jason Voorhees' mother, Pamela Voorhees, and that Pamela is still alive and that she's actually a resident in this small town that they live in, but she's kind of antisocial. She doesn't really talk with too many people. She keeps to herself. She stays in home a lot.
She's sort of the only person who was there around that time. She's the only person left from the time, or who has an intimate knowledge of any kind. I don't know if we necessarily know that she's Jason's mom right now. I feel like that could kind of be a cool reveal for their conversation, but she's the only person to talk to about this, basically, who's not going to give you the same legend,
Becky decides after school that she's going to secretly, not telling her friends, she's going to try to find Pamela and pay her a visit.
Yeah.
So Becky gets invited into her home. They end up having a sit-down conversation. We see Pamela's like this really sweet, really kind lady. Whether she finds it out or she brings it up about Jason's death, and she tells her about Jason and her experience with that incident when she lost her son. And Becky brings up, the spooky ghost stories that have been spread about her son, seeing if she's, heard about it.
Yeah.
And Pamela is aware of these stories, but excuses them as just nothing but a story.
Yeah, these are just, people love to distort the truth for a good fright. During this scene, at some point, Becky does let out that they went to the camp, and, Pamela makes a note of that.
And then eventually, when Kevin does get back in school, the stories become worse and worse. The initial warning out of concern that he told Becky has now been spread to have been like a straightforward threat that he gave. Like they're really twisting the whole story as the game of telephone takes place throughout school.
Yeah.
And now at this
Things
point,
are not good for Kevin.
Exactly. Kevin is more isolated than ever at this point. Becky, however, decides one day to sit with Kevin and tell him that she doesn't believe that Kevin did it. She just firmly believes that Kevin is not responsible. And she explains that the night that she went to the camp, she could feel something was at the camp.
Some kind of malevolent
she's
presence.
not sure, but there was some kind of Maleficent, starring Angelina Jolie, was playing. She's not sure what, but she could feel some presence of another was there. As time passes, Becky loses respect from other students, including her friends, for befriending Kevin.
Yeah, they kind of start to lump her in as a freak too, or like she's going crazy because of all these things that have happened.
And then one night, Becky goes home to Kevin's place. They're hanging out, they're bonding, they're having real conversations. I imagine like they have that intimate moment where Kevin opens up about like what it was like to lose his mom.
Yeah.
So we're really getting to see them at a more vulnerable place, and they're really having a bonding moment. There's a knock on the door. Kevin opens the door, gets knocked out because it's fucking Dylan. So he just knocks Kevin to the ground. Dylan comes barging in. He's trying to like drag Becky out of the house because he's concerned for her.
Yeah.
Like he's angry, but he's concerned,
And at this point, he really does not like and or trust or anything Kevin.
Anything Kevin related, right? Becky takes her stand and says that she's gonna stay.
Yeah.
That she believes Kevin didn't do it. Yada yada yada. They're having this.
You don't know what you're doing, Dylan. Like, shut up.
They're having this major fucking argument as things start to slowly simmer down. Suddenly, Jason Voorhees bursts in.
fucking appears.
Jason Voorhees, now we see him. Like, this is close to the finale, but it's not exactly the finale. It's a little bit like half the midpoint of Act 2.
He rips through the door.
Yeah, he rips through. He's
the
giant
door just
presence.
explodes in shards of wood.
And he's the Jason that we know.
Yeah.
Giant, burly, husky dude,
Big
hockey
guy.
mask.
Like the kind of guy who's big and imposing, but also looks like he might just have been living in the woods for a while. Like it's kind of hard to say exactly what the nature of Jason is. He's just fucking scary.
Yeah, exactly. Right when Jason bursts in, he immediately kills Dylan in front of Kevin and Becky. They both witness it. It's
like,
a horrific
nasty,
death.
you know?
Instantly, this leads into an escape scene, classic horror escape scene where they're trying to get away from the killer.
Yeah.
Running up the stairs, they can't get out, and then I imagine a moment that we see where, Kevin's trying to protect Becky.
Yeah.
Maybe he's trying to close a door. He just decides to stand up to this fucking monster.
He basically buys her enough time to get out the house.
But then Jason knocks him out, but doesn't kill him. We see that Jason kind of lets him live.
You can see Jason. We do one of those things where it's like you do a POV where you can kind of see Jason standing over him, and you're like, "Oh, this is a bad time to black out, but you're not gonna make it." But then we wake back up.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, Jason leaves Kevin. You see Jason, you're like, "Oh shit, this is bad." Kevin's blacking out. And then we immediately come to and Dad's waking him up. Okay. So we have no idea. Just like we passed out on Jason and now it's Dad. We cut back to Becky. She's in a bad way. She's been wandering for a little while. She's kind of losing it, but she's trying to get to the police station. And sort of on her way there, she passes Mrs. Voorhees' place, at which point Mrs. Voorhees comes out to check on her. And at first, that's a comforting thing. At first, it's like, oh, you might know something here. We can go to the police together. And the second that comes up, Mrs. Voorhees starts to shift and get a little more crazy. And it becomes clear that she's not necessarily a comforting presence. And she kidnaps Becky and takes her off somewhere, ostensibly to the woods. Which immediately, when we cut back to Kevin, immediately his first thought is, I gotta fucking find Becky.
I gotta find Becky.
I don't know if she made it or not.
There could be cops there and everything.
Yeah.
Who's like talking to them, interrogating the situation, taking out Dylan's body and everything, but they can tell like this definitely isn't Kevin. So Kevin's name is clear because there's no way that because Kevin was already knocked out. Yeah. They could see by all the damage. There's no way this high school kid could have done any of this.
Yeah.
Kevin's trying to find Becky. No one has seen her. No one's heard from her. Kevin gets a hunch that maybe she's been taken to Crystal Lake. Mm-hmm. If this was Jason who came in, he starts getting the idea that maybe this is a real man now that he saw this wasn't some deformed kid ghost. This is a big giant.
And Becky is the only one left of the kids who went up that weekend.
Yeah. Kevin takes his dad's car, decides to drive to Crystal Lake, and then we cut to in Crystal Lake. She's being pushed through the woods. Maybe Pamela has a gun or something.
Dragging her,
aiming it at Becky. And as she's like dragging Becky to Crystal Lake, specifically to the water, she's explaining that this is her son's birthday and that she believes Jason's alive and that she's bringing Becky to her son as a gift for his birthday because this is her chance for her to see Jason Voorhees again. This is Pamela's chance to see her son one more time. But before Jason can show up, we're thinking of some way where Kevin arrives. It allows for Pamela to get distracted, allowing for Becky to like grab an item or a rock or something.
Basically build a tense situation out of the fact that it's the three of them and Mrs. Voorhees has more leverage, but they two have the numbers together. And ride that sort of tension until Becky can clock her out.
Becky clocks her out. Hits her one more time, pretty much killing
lets
her.
That rage go.
Lets that rage go.
Lets that cathartic
Becky's like covered in blood. You can see the trauma she has from killing this woman.
Yeah.
But then Kevin's like, okay, we gotta go. So he grabs Becky. They start running away to immediately bump into Jason, where I imagine Jason just fucking kills Becky right away.
Yeah.
He just slaughters Becky right away. Kevin just falls to the ground, like awaiting his fate now, assuming he's gonna die next. And then Jason looks at him, but then just walks away, letting Kevin live. I don't really have an ending after that. That's pretty much the ending right there. We're not getting paid to do this, and we're not getting paid to write a whole thing. This is our basic beat sheet and comment.
This is
concept.
Sort of a rough first draft of a treatment. And we did talk about the ending. It's like, I think it might be cool, because, the final girl is such an ingrained thing in, slasher movie rules in the slasher movie rule book, and this might be just a cool opportunity to do a final boy or something like that. Just change it up a little bit and kind of give you something you weren't expecting as much.
And a little bit as a mystery as to why he doesn't ever kill Kevin.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe sequel leading it, franchising this a little bit.
Yeah.
To the point where it's like, why won't he kill Kevin? What is it about Kevin that he just lets him live? Or is Jason more specific about who he decides to kill?
Yeah,
like
and
the ones who visit his camp.
And you can sort of ride off those metaphors and things like that, because part of the point of the second act when they go to the camp is like, if Jason's there, he can clearly observe that these are kind of like the people who are responsible for at least what we know about that legend,
Yeah.
the negligent sort of counselors who came up to Canoodle and they've come to this place, so like the scene of a gruesome death.
Because part of why Jason died was because the counselors weren't watching the kids, because the counselors were having sex with each other. So just the fact that Becky was fucking Dylan at the time could be enough to prompt Jason to decide, okay, she's part of his hit list now too.
Yeah, and like Kevin wasn't there for any of that. And Kevin, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty innocent character. And I think the only reason necessarily that Becky has to die is just because of Mama Voorhees.
Yeah, Jason sees that Becky kills Pamela Voorhees. Yeah, there you go.
All lost
a little speculation / written concept that we have here. Yeah.
I'm sure if we went over this again, we would change. We would tweak it. We would draft it.
Yeah.
But this seemed like a cool foundation for like, hey, you want to reboot Friday the 13th? Like 80s nostalgia is all the rage. You could shoot it with a very distinct and deliberate visual style. We use touchstones again, like It Follows and stuff like that. Give it that really distinct and deliberate, visual style. Maybe bring in some kind of 80s-esque, like, synthy score if you want to. And make it about kids who are at least counselor age, and bring it back from the sort of like, 20-somethings in the woods. Make it a little bit more of a fleshed out world without going like, telepathic connection and destiny and shit. Just make it a small town story and make Jason a boogeyman again. And also playing up, like, I think it would be a cool idea if in the camp sequence you really did play with a few different kinds of sexual anxiety or sexual themes, because like those are always there in Jason movies, and I feel like it would be a nice thing to do, especially if you want to breathe new life, to actually make the sex mean something or use it for something, use it as a thematic thing. So like you have that very uncomfortable sex scene between Dylan and Becky, like that is one example of that, and I'm sure if we flesh this out there would be more.
All right, guys, well, what'd you think of our How It Could Work idea? What's your Friday the 13th reboot idea? Put it in the comments below. Subscribe to The Real Rejects. Reasons to Jerry on Twitter and Instagram. Social media manager, Facebook.com/Bloomhouse and The Real Rejects. And shout out to Stacey Howard. From
Tyrone.
No, I talk about Tyrone too much.
Okay, shout out to...
He keeps sending me pictures of his small penis.
Oh, yeah.
This tiny, erect penis.
I'm just trying to imagine now. It's one dick I would like to see.